Has gaming tech hit a wall, or are we on the brink of a new golden age? That's a question we're asking on E+T Off the Page this month. The pace of gaming innovation between the years 1990 and 2010 saw a drastic shift from 2D sprites moving linearly across flat landscapes to fully realised 3D worlds presenting an almost limitless array of gameplay options. But as development costs skyrocketed and physical hardware reaches its limits, the question becomes, where does gaming go from here? Have we now entered an era of diminishing returns where AAA games cost more than your average Hollywood film only to deliver a set of experiences that are long familiar to seasoned gamers? Or do promising technologies like AI, virtual reality, 5G and ray tracing offer a glimpse into a future of possibilities that gamers can only imagine? To discuss these issues, I'm joined by my E+T colleagues Tim Fryer and Tanya Weaver, and Dr. Marisa Dimmer, a games designer expert at Brunel University of London. Marisa, I wanted to ask whether you think the gaming industry, which has long been a driver of technological innovation, is now falling behind the trend as hardware struggles to keep up.
Thank you very much for the invite. I would say falling behind is not exactly what is happening. I mean, games industry has always been evolving hand in hand with technological innovation, and it is true that lately tech advancements are advancing a bit like less fast or as fast as in previous years. But there are, as you mentioned, a lot of advances in software optimization, like the real-time ray tracing and with DLSS, and Gen AI will bring a lot of advances as well there in that field.
There will be quite a lot of acronyms in this podcast. So just to briefly explain to people who don't understand what it is, could you talk about what DLSS is?
Deep learning supersampling, which uses neural networks to help with like global illumination. There are like a lot of like software algorithms that are implemented for more kind of like real and fast graphics, basically, and then generative AI. I think
is self-explanatory.
Yeah, it's self-explanatory. So there's advances there, and also the other one is which is fairly not exactly new, but like emerging cloud computing. So like gaming using the cloud. A lot of the the games development is about the stories, is about the mechanics and the gameplay, and making like games that are meaningful and art pieces. So there's a lot of like more indie studios, especially with the use of generative. It has kind of democratized like the use of tools, so that you don't have to have like huge budgets in order to to be creative and create like a game that can be loved. But without like being, have super advanced graphics.
So there's tools like generative AI and DLSS. Do they just speed the development of games, or do they actually make the games that you develop better?
Well, so both. So there is a use in the rendering, so like making like even more realistic graphics, and also in different aspects of the development pipeline. But also Gen AI tools can help, and actually are used now quite a lot in the creation process. So, for example, asset creation. So, asset would mean like 3D characters, environments, VFX, music, sound. So, the tools can be used in that way to help ideation. So, you have like a base to work on, and from there is the creativity of the people working with this to expand and bring it to like to a fully fleshed game. So at the beginning, when you experiment or you create like concept of art, for example, or an initial writing for the lore or for the quests, etc., it's really useful to start with that. So it definitely speeds up the development as well.
AI is only as good as the data that it's trained on, isn't it? Is AI in the gaming industry trained on other games? And the reason I ask, of course, is does that just mean that you get the same variations of the same games coming out all the time rather than genuinely new ideas coming in?
So I think the AI tools that are used are, for example, they are based on the specific fields. For example, for art, you would have like the text to image to create the concept art, or in the narrative design to the same tools like to create like different narratives. I think they're trained where they're trained, like usually like, for example, like Midjourney is the most kind of well-known tool for text to image. So this can be used also to generate some concept art. and start from there. There are, I guess, some limitations on the application of Gen AI for things like branching dialogues, for example. So there's a limitation that Gen AI has in all the other fields, the same limitations you will see also in the application within a games development pipeline.
Well, yeah, I wanted to pick up on that actually, because when you talk about branching dialogues, I mean, for example, role-playing games that are quite story-driven for the last 20 years or so, if you go back to games like Skyrim or more recent games like Cyberpunk, the characters are all using pre-written dialogue, and what you can say to the characters is also pre-written, and you might have a selection of things you can say to them, and then they can respond back to you based on a selection of things that have been pre-written for them to respond to you with. But do you think there's a future where generative AI could be used to have a more dynamic conversation, such as people might have with ChatGPT these days, but have that within the context of a game?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is going to be like a real change in the next few years. You can have, like, for example, NPCs, non-player characters, that can not just respond to players' actions, but also like adapt. So they can look at the play style and adapt like the responses based on that. The game itself can use that as well. So you can, like, for example, based like what's your play style, they can adapt the level difficulty, for example. And there's like the opportunity for kind of more interactive and slightly in-depth, let's say, interactions within the game that make the game a bit more immersive. I'm using the term more in kind of like how much you're embedded and invested in the story and the interactions with the environment and the characters.
So where are we going down that route? You're speaking about it as if it's something that could happen in the future. Is that the sort of thing that is being developed at the moment?
Well, let me just butt in there just to say that I have actually seen a few sort of prototype versions of like a first-person game where someone goes into a cafe, I think, and they have got a mic on and they are talking to the character in the game, and the character's responding directly to what they're saying. So,
and it's unique dialogue that's going on.
Yeah, and it's unique generated dialogue. So, I mean, I've seen that like at a sort of prototype stage thus far. I can't remember what the exact project was, but there's nothing to my knowledge that's actually commercially available.
No, yeah. But I think we will soon be seeing this. Like, as you say, like the dialogues can be like unique. And I mean, you can have like a different experience every time you play. And there is, now when you go and talk to a NPC, you might get like a bit of like different options, going down the route. But then at some point these are exhausted and then keep saying the same thing. But imagine if every time they respond to you in like a different way, which of course has some challenges as well. In that particular, I think there is like AI systems so far don't have like the capacity, I think, for long-term memory. So there is a challenge that you might get like first of all, the AI could hallucinate, as we call it. So kind of like just break the character of the NPC or start talking back like things that are completely irrelevant to the story, and also forget, in quotation, what has been the current interaction with you as a player. So then, the interaction, and it doesn't make sense anymore. So there is this so far. I know there is work being done on this long-term, short-term memory on that. So I don't know where it could be.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's actually an interesting example of that recently. A few months ago, Microsoft came out with a system called Muse, which is basically a text-to-game generator. So you could literally say, generate a game where you start at the top of a hill and snowboard down the hill, for example, and it will generate that game, and you can actually play that in real time purely based on, I mean, it's very rudimentary, but I've seen a few demos of it. And yeah, when you say the problem with AI is it lacks long-term memory, is quite viscerally shown in those examples, because you can play the game for about 30 seconds or a minute, and then kind of things start to lose stability, and you might turn a corner, but then when you turn the camera back, you're in a totally different place. So yeah, so I think these are a lot of
there's no
issues that need to be
coherence, basically.
Exactly, yeah.
And then of course we should also talk about the cost that this has, both in performance, but also the cost of actually using AI.
What, environmentally, you mean?
Yeah, environmentally. And also ethical use of it, which is like the other, like, parallel discussion and discourse that's happening, like, globally.
Well, what do you mean exactly by that?
With like having AI that are ethically trained, for example. What AI tools would you use,
Yeah.
Wait, do you mean on what it's trained on? Do you mean like where it gets its data from?
Yes. So there is also a lot of, like, you can see it on the news that a lot of, like, AI tools are being used on, for example, artists work without their consent. The only ethical trained AI for text to image is Adobe's Firefly, because it has been trained in Adobe's stock photography. So it's about, like, would you use this tool? So there's a lot of ethical considerations. Would you use, like, tools that have been, unethically trained, for example? But I think these are, like, also parallel discussions that are happening.
And the thing about the environmental footprint of AI, it becomes a completely different thing if you're talking about using AI for game development, which is one thing. But if it's being actually used, as we were talking about, in a dynamic sense while people are playing games, then that's going to blow the roof off the amount of energy that the AI is using, isn't it?
You mean like in real time, like
Yes.
streaming, etc.? Yeah, I mean, surprisingly, a thing, and I think I read that recently, that if you're, like, playing online on the cloud, let's say, these would actually, in the end, like, if you kind of do these calculations, have, like, a less cost, because the data servers are always, like, being utilized, whereas if you play on your console, for example, the amount of time that the console is utilized is not as much as the data servers, right? So it might be, like, more efficient to actually do cloud computing rather than playing games on your own console.
Just to clarify, when you're talking about cloud computing in this context, you're talking about services like Google's shuttered Stadia service, right? Where all you really have is a controller. None of the game is actually running on local hardware. So
Yes.
I assume the reduction in environmental impact is due to the fact that the actual hardware itself you don't need as powerful hardware,
Exactly.
and therefore the hardware itself doesn't use as many resources or use as much energy to create.
Yeah, in comparison to if you have, like, a constant or constantly upgrading the high-end hardware locally,
So this series of podcasts is called Off the Page because it refers to an article that we've run in a recent issue. And this of course, was about a feature that you wrote, Jack, in the last issue. And you were talking in that about there being some resistance to cloud computing for gaming because of latency issues. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, if you're talking about especially multiplayer games, you really want the feedback between literally your hands on the controller and what happens on the screen to be instantaneous, or at least imperceptible from kind of a human brain capacity. And the problem with cloud services at the moment is that there might be a tenth of a second delay between, say, the inputs from your controller versus the image that you see on screen, because those inputs have got to be sent all the way to the data center. That's the game is then being run on a computer at the data center, and then the visual feedback is sent back to your screen. And actually, that does incur a time cost. And
is a tenth of a second perceptible?
I mean, yeah, absolutely, it's perceptible. I mean, I play multiplayer games, and I mean, I won't bore you with the details, but I'm aware when something is a tenth of a second behind. I can very much feel it. But it depends on the game you're playing. If you are playing shooters, like online shooters, then it's incredibly important. If you're playing like a turn-based role-playing game, actually, it doesn't necessarily matter so much. And especially if you're playing something like, I don't know, I'm thinking of examples like Slay the Spire, which is like a card-based game, where actually a tenth of a second is completely irrelevant. You're not even manipulating your character around a 3D world. It's just kind of everything's happening very slowly anyway. So it's got different use cases. But at the moment, I don't think, at least Britain's networking infrastructure is good enough to allow everyone who wants to play games to use that and have a satisfactory experience, especially out of places like London. I mean, in London, we're very close to the data centers. So the latency between your experience at home and the data center itself is in some way impacted by the physical distance between you and the data center. I mean, you are talking about fractions of a second here, but it does matter. You can feel it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely, you're right. There are technologies like the edge computing that are trying to close that gap, like by bringing the data like closer, let's say, to the physical locations. Some processes could happen locally at your machine and then some others in the cloud. So there are some advances there, but it's pretty much what you said, Jack, right now, yeah.
So there is always, or not always, but for the time being at least, that we do need some sort of physical console, particularly if you're playing very reactive games.
Yeah, competitive gaming, definitely. Yeah, the 1/10 of a second makes a huge difference.
Yeah, I mean, and I think you see that in terms of the market, because, I mean, going back 10 years, you had, Google Stadia, which was Google's real push into gaming, and that was entirely based on the cloud. And I mean, they shuttered it after a few years because it just wasn't picking up the traction that. I also think there might be an element where gamers, they like to have the physical hardware and they like to feel like they physically own the game. And, as long as they have electricity, they don't even need the internet and they can still play single player games at home. And their access to those games are not entirely at the whim of a company like Google who may, for example, lose the license for it and suddenly they're unable to play that game. And they're halfway through and they've got to save and they've played 100 hours and suddenly they can't finish it because Google's lost the license. Or what happened with Stadia where Google decided to shut the service down completely. So I think people do like to feel untethered from the whims of massive companies like Google when it comes to their gaming experience.
Yeah, and people just like owning stuff anyway, don't they?
And also the modding, it's a big thing in the gaming communities that you wouldn't be able to do in a cloud gaming. And I think that the niche is very small for products like Stadia. And I think also reselling games. So people like engage in these activities too. And I guess, they really like owning, like the ownership. I feel very much that you lose kind of ownership a bit if your game's on the cloud.
What about while we're talking about hardware? Because one of your many areas of expertise, Marisa, is in virtual reality and the headsets, isn't it? Jack, you mentioned this again in your article, didn't you, that it's really not quite happened for it. It remains out there as an aspirational technology.
Well, look, this is my experience of VR. I actually went to a kind of conference showcase I think it was called VR World, and it's in either 2017 or 2016, something like that. And I went there, and the conference was just brimming with stalls of companies interested in it. Everyone showing off different interesting technologies, things where at one point I remember wearing a glove and that glove would like map each finger and you could like pick things up and the glove would react against your finger motion, for example. So it actually felt like you were picking something up in a virtual environment. And I went the next year. It was about 2016, 2017, and I went the next year and the conference was about half the size, and it just really felt like something happened in that year where the bottom just fell out of the market, and VR that was once kind of heralded as the future of gaming technology, people seem to realize that actually it was more of a niche technology. And since then, I haven't seen that uptake increasing that much. I mean, Facebook has entered... Meta actually, I suppose, with Meta Quest. Mark Zuckerberg's very keen on VR and he thinks like the metaverse is going to be the next big thing. But I'm not sure that's quite borne out based on user numbers at the moment. But I don't know. What do you think about that?
I think the metaverse is going to be a thing, but we are not as close and we're still building it. So when there was this whole buzz about the metaverse and we're building the metaverse, etc., it kind of felt like, especially big companies and Meta, which started all this, that they kind of know what metaverse is, but I don't think we do. We kind of like all kind of towards working on what this metaverse is going to be. In terms of VR gaming, 2016, I think, was one of the more recent kind of like buzz and actually real work that happened in terms of the hardware and software for VR, because it has many decades of research behind it. But it was the first time that actually got commercialized and reached, quite a bigger audience than all the previous decades. But it is still, you wear a headset, your embodiment changes. Back in the beginning, you also had to set up like cameras, etc., when you didn't have like the wireless. And it's not like, I remember I was reading back then that in 2 years we won't have television sets anymore in our living rooms. We'll have VR stations. Like, this didn't happen. So it is also like this is similar discussions about what's going to be like the metaverse, etc. That you put like on this device for a little bit and then you take it off. You cannot like be 24 hours on a like wired like this. It is, it's sometimes it's disorienting as well, but you're like kind of, apart from that and some kind of like vertical problems that people might have. So because for a lot of people, you need to kind of get used to it. But all of this aside, you enter like a virtual world. It completely like changes like your perception, say. You need to have like really good design on the controllers and what the controllers do in this virtual world, be it like finger tracking or, head tracking or the hand tracking. It's not something that you like would go in like and spend hours there, right? And it's a little bit like it's taxing. And even if you get like a killer app or a killer game, Half-Life Alyx is considered one of the like best games like for VR, and it's true that the production quality is amazing. They have made like amazing use of like the controllers, the environment, the story, everything is like the whole game is really nice. But again, it's not that you're going to be there for like playing it for ages, or that you're going to go and buy a VR headset just to play 1 or 2 games. So for the moment, although this blooming of the VR in 2016 led to a lot of important advances in the graphics, and that's great because it went like in a few years like from 0 to like hundreds, and it's really useful for a lot of things. For example, for psychology experiments, VR is great, but for gaming, it's still the value proposition for playing in VR as opposed to like lying on your couch after a day's work and switching on the console, or Switch, or even mobile, which is like the market segment that has like the most growth. It's not there yet.
Can I just fly off on a tangent with apologies away from the gaming side of things? We in E+T, we cover an awful lot across the general engineering community, and VR headsets has really found a home in things like training, in maintenance, these sorts of applications. And you also mentioned metaverse. The two don't go hand in hand, but a definition of a metaverse might be that it covers everything, whereas individual companies create their own metaverses, which is a bit counterintuitive. But could these be better? They have got better. I've tried many VR headsets over the years, and they've definitely got so much better as time has gone on. But do we need the gaming community to really take it to that next step? There isn't the value in doing it purely in an engineering sense, perhaps, but to get that extra level of quality in VR and maybe the metaverse, do we need the gaming community, because that's where the big bucks are, to drive it, perhaps?
I think we need design thinking more, which, of course, gaming community has ample of, is how do you have a medium. You need to design for the medium. And, this medium has certain constraints and certain opportunities. So you really need to think like from a design perspective, how can I like design the interactions that happens through the hardware and what is also the environment, like the more of the software aspect, that will like maximize its potential and create a meaningful experience. And there have been examples with artists using VR, for example. I have seen some amazing like artistic pieces where, you go, you wear a headset and there's things happening and it's a story. So it's really meaningful at the end. You kind of like, it resonates with you. You still remember it like a week later. games like Half-Life Alyx have, utilized a lot of the hardware, the ergonomics, the psychology of wearing a headset and what you do with that. So I think the creativity and the design thinking that is not only of the game community, but you can find it in the game community as well, is needed in order to make use of the VR as a medium, like actually maximize its potential as a medium.
I also think there's an argument to be said that, traditional gaming, you can play it in split screen with your friend and you can be in the same room and it's like a social experience. Whereas I think VR, it inherently cuts you off from the rest of the world. And do we want gamers to be even more siloed?
Or can it do the opposite? Can it put you in the same world, albeit a virtual world?
Well, that's a good point. Especially if you're in remote locations, actually, you're probably right. It would feel more like you're in the room with that person than traditional flat screen gaming. So I suppose you're right. It has two different sides to it. You're quite an expert on VR, Marisa. Where do you see VR being used outside of gaming?
Oh, well, it has a lot, as I mentioned before, psychology. I have actually experienced it and it's really powerful.
Could you talk about that a bit more?
I have one of the first times that I did it was maybe 2007, I think, and that was like a cave environment. It wasn't even through a headset. The cave environments were big walls where the environment was projected. We were on the top of the building and then they turned off the gravity and you really felt that you were falling down. And again, a couple of years ago, I was in I don't remember where this was. It was a research project where I was in a room. So you had different rooms, different areas where you had to pass through. And each one would create a challenge around a phobia. And there was a room full of huge spiders that were going around very fast. I love spiders. I have no problem with spiders. I could not go through that room, not even by closing my eyes and just turn teleportation on and be okay, I'm out of it now. So I think it's very powerful because exactly there are worlds that are being recreated with specific, themes, based on what you want to research. Training as well. I have worked with VR, but I mostly lately work with mixed reality. And that's where you actually have augmentation superimposed in the real world. So that would be either see-through. So, for example, Microsoft HoloLens, which is a pair of smart glasses that you put on and you can see the environment as it is normally. But then you also see digital material superimposed in the environment in ways that it is actually accurate, has spatial understanding. And it also can happen through VR headsets, through pass-through. So you have a video feed of the outside. And actually, Apple Vision Pro has brilliant mixed reality mode. And that also is a big opportunity. And I have, my last projects have been with mixed reality because you are not completely transported in a different world. You still see the real world, but you can create a cyber-physical space where the digital and the physical blend together. Microsoft HoloLens has been used a lot in manufacturing and training. And then you have VR in health. Health is also a big place, for pain management, for example. For mental health. There's the opportunities are endless, really. But what I said before about the design thinking approach is very important. It's not just designing because we have VR, but it's how does VR help us to reach our goal.
The value of gaming itself. Sorry, again, this is going off on a different tangent, but the value of gaming, because a lot of parents, Tanya, you've
I
got
can step in now.
You can step in. You've got a 10-year-old who loves gaming, and there's that constant parental battle: am I doing the right thing by letting them play games all the time and so on? And it's generally perceived in a negative sort of way. But is that really the case? Is gaming very good for developing problem solving, teamwork, application? An interest in coding or STEM? Does it play a useful part in a child's development?
So my son is really into Minecraft, and when I watch him, I am astounded because he's building these worlds, and he's like, "Look at this labyrinth I've built, and I put this lever, and I go down here," and I'm just amazing. Now I really feel it's amazing. I know it's really gamers are like, oh my God, that's so rudimentary, but I think it's really good. And at the moment he's into Flight Simulator, which I think it's really, he like takes up, yesterday he reenacted the Concorde crash in Charles de Gaulle, and he was like, look, and we take off and then this engine fails and we're going. So I think it's really interesting, but also then I'm like, too much screen time.
Yeah, and also, I mean, you did mention to me the other day that your son got £70 for his birthday and spent £40 on a bunch of fake planes in Microsoft Simulator. So
he did.
There is a concern on that side.
The point of my question is that does your son now want to be a pilot, or is that something that he'd consider?
I actually laughed yesterday. He said to me, I want to be a flight attendant. And I was like, why not a pilot? He was like, because it's hard work and you don't get paid that well, so I might as well just be a flight attendant. So, but I think
no, then. Okay.
No. But I think he's very interested in geography, and it's amazing. You can fly anywhere in the world, and he knows that it's really improved his geography. He knows all the capital cities of all the countries.
So what about you, Marisa? What do you think? Does it have a positive role to play in the child's development?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, games have got like really bad publicity, and they get occasionally, apart from the start of the pandemic, where the original guidelines were like, stay in and play games, escapism. No, it has so many elements like to teach from creativity, like sandbox games, like Minecraft, to, you have ethical dilemmas, like how do you, progress a narrative? What do you do? Your decisions have consequences. What does that mean? Develop reflexes. First-person shooter games, like you have to be very fast. So real agility, I think that gamers that play, especially like competitive gamers or that play a lot of these games, they have like better reflexes in tests.
My reflexes must be incredible then, the amount of eyes. So.
Puzzle games really train the brain. Like games always like teach you something, no matter what the game is, even if it's not an educational game. Like you're engaged in a story, you're interacting with, virtual people, but still you play a character most of the times. There's a lot of things to learn, as you said, like geography for Flight Simulator. And it's also fun. You don't have to memorize things or read like, huge texts. It's you learn by doing, which is the most beneficial way of learning.
Yeah, I mean, I think gaming gets a bad rep, but I mean, I know personally, if I'm gaming, I feel like my brain's doing a lot more than just like chucking on an episode of Love Island or something. Like, do you know what I mean? I feel like it gets a bad rep, but actually people watch so much rubbish TV for hours and hours and hours. And is that better? Is that better for your brain? I don't know. I'd imagine not, but I'm not an expert. I just wondered, what excites you most about gaming tech in the next 5 to 10 years, and what do you think might be leading the pack in terms of new technologies?
I think generative AI is one, like the most obvious, and I'm waiting to see, both the advances, but also like the regulations, how to, as I said, like use it in a way that is not taxing for both environment and also ethical. One of the things with Gen AI that I think I mentioned in the beginning is that it has democratized a lot of the development. I want to see more creative games, like not games that are just like going for more and more graphics and like amazing environments, but actually have the same kind of like storylines, story arcs, or make you do, just to stretch into like a lot of AAA games, like do things like collect things or doing like, boring side quests or quests. And I want to see like more the indie community, what it will be, coming up with, because with these tools, if costs are reduced, now smaller studios can actually produce like quality content in terms of like graphics and like that the big studios currently do or have access to. I want to see the creativity flourishing. I want to see what will come out in the next years from that community.
Yeah, if I could, and I do feel a bit of an outsider, obviously in the gaming community. But we started talking about the technical development of games, but games are absolutely fantastic these days, aren't they? photorealistic Call of Duty, things like that. They are absolutely fantastic. Do they actually need to get any better anyway? Is it nice to have just that tiny differentiation between what is a game and what is real life, particularly maybe when you're talking about shooter type games and that sort of thing? Just knowing that you are in a video environment rather than translating it directly into reality. And maybe the development, and I completely agree with you, Maurice, is about creativity. Minecraft came along and it was, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was rubbish graphically. It was
still is.
It is.
Is it still rubbish? But it captured people's imaginations, didn't it? And went enormous. And it
was not developed by a massive team either. In fact, I think it might have just been started by one developer initially.
Well, maybe that's what it needs. It needs somebody who can tap into the imagination, particularly of children, but people of all ages. That imagination is what needed, rather than squeezing an extra 0.5% of performance out of the graphics or the latency and the computing and so on, perhaps.
Yes, yeah. I mean, the heart of games is that artistic expressions, expressions of art. They're art pieces, they're meaningful, interactive experiences. And there are like plenty, like thousands of game titles that are amazing, that have left like an imprint to many people, and they're not nearly like as like using high-end graphics or things like that. So I want to see like where this will go now. And there is a risk that there's going to be, especially from big studios, like a focus on more realistic graphics, and then the market goes more towards there instead of the giving the space for more creativity, even for big studios. So I'm excited because now, like, the smaller studios can deliver in terms of the visual output, let's say, the experiences that big studios, if together, like without this kind of monetization models and, like they're making the games for the players. So I want to see where this will go.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for joining us today, Marisa, and also thanks to my boss, Tim Fryer and Tanya Weaver. If you enjoyed this episode of E+T Off the Page, please subscribe and share it with someone who might be interested.